From Russia with Love, a manifesto for self-governance and self-preservation for the indigenes of the Niger area. Summary. Contents page. People of Black origin and Russia, page 2. What would a Putin ally do to move Nigeria forward? Page 3. Security summary, page 4. Restructuring summary, page 5. Infrastructure summary, page 6. Power summary, page 7. Healthcare summary, page 8. Education summary, page 9. Economy summary, page 10. Corruption and public sector summary, page 11. Agriculture summary, page 12. Culture and tourism summary, page 13. Table of figures, page 14. Page 2, People of Black origin and Russia. Whilst reflecting on a plausible nexus to connect the existence of the average citizen of Nigeria with the controversial, and maybe even cantankerous topic I will be speaking on today, I came across a perfect answer in the form of a retort to a question on a news show by one of the people I know that truly deserves the comrade label, Mr. Femi Falana, ASN. Video of the retort by Femi Falana.
I have not endorsed any candidate, and if I'm going to do that, it doesn't have to be a matter of, I'm not going to make it a media affair. I have already made it clear to you. The least I can embrace is the adoption of Chapter 2 of the Constitution by the political parties. And I am saying that because Section 224 of the Constitution prescribes that the aims and programs of every political party in Nigeria shall reflect Chapter 2 of the Constitution.
So which of these parties, Mr. Falana, aligns with that position that you have held on that matter? Which of the political parties? Does the APC, Tinubu, PDP, Atiku, Peter Obi, Congress or NPP?
No.
Or which of them aligns with this?
You see, I don't want to go into personalities. But I've made the point abundantly clear that as far as the Constitution is concerned, Section 14 provides that the security and welfare of the Nigerian people shall be the primary purpose of government. Section 16 provides that the management of the economy of Nigeria shall be fully in the hands of the government, not in the hands of the private sector, which is the campaign of most of the political parties. That same section provides that the wealth of our country, the Commonwealth, shall be equitably distributed to promote the happiness of our people. I haven't seen that in the ongoing campaign. And so my position, therefore, is that the only political system that can guarantee the implementation of Chapter 2 of the Constitution is socialism. And that is why I am campaigning, I am working for the socialist reconstruction of Nigeria.
Page 3. What would a Putin ally do to move Nigeria forward? For full disclosure, I have attempted to engage this topic from the perspective of an individual looking for a real change in Nigeria, someone who has taken time out to engage the perspectives that have been written down by the true agitators within the Nigerian space currently, and seeks to consciously articulate a view that has a common denominator across the divide created by the various perspectives of a possible future for the nation-states within Nigeria. The key perspectives I considered are as follows. Union of the Orange Constitution, Biafra Charter, Odujowa Constitution, 2019 AAC Manifesto. Another Now, Fiction on an Alternative Political Economy. It would be interesting to be one of the protagonists in the book Another Now. World imperialism can be divided into two main camps. The haves, those who possess colonies, and the have-nots, those who seek to possess. NB, the book Another Now might be fiction, but note that Xi Jinping of China just pivoted his country back towards Marxism during the last Communist Party elections, 2022, where he was given a fresh new 5-year mandate to steer the ship of state. As someone who was educated in Eastern Europe during the Perestroika period, where the focus in engineering school was to study progress, not what you are encumbered with by the system that is looking for a particular outcome, I believe Putin has moved on from communist bashing and has rightly very well made the dream of ushering in a new multipolar world his life ambition. It is perhaps the best vindication the communists could ever have dreamed of, given the conspiracy that constantly undermined their efforts to better a lot of their peoples, not unlike the peoples of Cuba and Venezuela are currently experiencing. In the world of IT, we would say the Nigerian OS is completely infested with viruses and malware. The Russians are known to be good at AV and anti-malware, and needs to be either treated with antivirus, anti-malware, software or reformatted and rebuilt with a clean new operating system, OS. The reason why Russia is the template we are using to attempt to straighten out the critically bent Nigeria is because it is perhaps the only jungle that those from the garden were unable to subjugate, unlike the fate that befell China and India, using the language of Joseph Borrell of the EU. Page 4, Security Summary. State security has long been a craft the Russians appear to have mastered, going as far back as 1480 when the Grand Duchy of Moscow stopped paying tribute to the Mongols and took full control of its own sovereignty under Ivan the Great. To confront the multifaceted existential security challenges being faced in Nigeria today, the security of lives and property should be immediately handed over to local security structures based on the 18 national regions that are known to exist within Nigeria. Each of the 18 designated security regions would then engage in the creation of a top-level hierarchy of operational staff comprised of technocrats and securocrats. The technocrats would be involved in looking into issues of improvement of the welfare and well-being of those in the region, whilst the securocrats will focus on working with the Russian Wagner PMC group to bring in military trainers and retired military engineers, who will be tasked with training locals and providing all the infrastructure required to prosecute a sustained campaign to flush out terrorist elements. One of their key objectives would be to implement border security force-type training for each region in order to systematically stop the unrestricted spread of stateless terrorist elements from the northern parts of Nigeria to the southern parts of the country. Their working model would involve bringing together seasoned communist/socialist group members, local community leaders, local vigilante group representatives, example Amoticon, ESN, representatives of any local self-determination groups, example Oduduwa, IPOB, local religious leaders, pastor/imam/chief, etc., to form multiple world-level terrorist hunting groups to bring swift justice to any marauders involved in kidnappings and wanton killings. On a national level, as was done by Russia in Chechnya, the central government should immediately release all political prisoners and bring in the Russian diplomats and mediators who helped to shape the post-Chechen war policies in Russia to help with the implementation of options that would alleviate any aspects of the security concerns that are openly harbored by the various groups that are agitating for self-determination. As security does not exist in a vacuum, the technocrats should work with Russian regional developmental agencies to pick up on finding immediate tactical solutions to issues that cause insecurity to fester. On a separate note, in a world that right now requires strict adherence to human rights principles, in order to keep things in balance, the Russians will be approached for them to provide access to retired communist administrators along with, say, Orthodox religious officials, who together are known to have a lot of experience in the cohesive planning and running of the operations of various aspects of closely integrated institutions. It is anticipated that the technocrats would be in charge of the various elements of defense in depth of their catchment area, including the deployment of surveillance drones, the repair of road sections that offer marauders the opportunity to carry out kidnappings, the setup of technical solutions for tracking the unusual movement of funds either via cash or physical transfer within the local banking/financial system, amongst other things. Lastly, as part of their real-world training, and as a way of improving the usefulness of the expert ideas being provided by the Russian specialists, some representatives of the technocrats should be sent to areas of Russia like Mariupol currently being restored after devastation, whilst representatives of the securocrats should be sent to Chechnya, and say Enagada, where they can pick up expert operational advice from Russian security advisors currently enmeshed in counter-terrorist security operations. Page 5, Restructuring Summary. Just like Russia is divided into 12 economic regions, Nigeria should be divided into 8 economic regions/zones. Under the 8-zone arrangement, the North and the South will each have 4 zones. Whilst the North will include the Northwest, North Central, Northeast, and Middle Belt, the South shall have the Southwest, Southeast, South-South, and Midwest. Each of these economic zones will also map to a geopolitical region that has its own constitution or charter and legislation, although the mode of the authority of their organs of power delivery might differ, based on the peculiarities of each region. To be more specific, the authority will differ based on the fact that some regions might be monoethnic, whilst most of the regions will turn out to be multi-ethnic in composition. The Nigerian economic regions would be created broadly based on sharing the following characteristics: common economic and social goals and participation in development programs, relatively similar economic conditions and potential, similar climatic, ecological, and geological conditions, similar methods of technical inspection of new construction, similar methods of conducting customs oversight, overall similar living conditions of the population. In order for the security of lives and property to be quickly brought under control, Nigeria will need to have 18 security districts, zones. Each security district operates under the command of the district headquarters, headed by the district commander. The commander will be fully in charge of any security issues that affect areas within their geographic land area. Abuja and Lagos will be granted the status of cities of federal importance, just like the 3 Russian cities, Moscow, St. Petersburg, and Sevastopol, are of federal importance and have the status of both city and separate federal subjects in Russia. As we hurtle towards the approaching elections, amendments to curb the current extensive presidential influence should be initiated by regional groupings made up of senators, House of Representative members, regional governors, and the new technocrats and securocrats having come together to form a new symbolic state council under the existing interim constitution, as the first step in the journey of ushering in the Orange Constitution. Leaving no stones unturned, and no avenues for good unexploited, changes should be made to the existing, now interim constitution, to clip the wings of any successor to Buhari in the year 2023 by weakening the presidency. The drive is to provide scope for the regions to gain some influence in the shaping of a new dawn, as processes are triggered to usher in a new constitution. One of the stated objectives would be to ensure that no one ever comes in who is anywhere as powerful as Buhari was, to the extent of leading the country to the brink of destruction, as he has done. Like the Russians make heavy use of their municipal divisions for all service delivery to their citizenry, regional governments in Nigeria should create LG structures that ensure the following. Ensure the independent and local creation of solutions by the population for the issues of local importance like the possession, use, and disposal of municipal property. Local self-government shall be exercised by citizens through a referendum, election, and other forms of direct expression of the will of the people, through elected officials and other members of bodies dedicated to local self-government. Independently manage municipal property, form, adopt and implement the local budgets, introduce local taxes and dues, ensure the protection of public order, and also solve other issues of local importance. Be vested by law with certain state powers and receive the necessary material and financial resources for their implementation. Page 6, Infrastructure Summary. What do nearly all the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa nations have in common? Technological solidarity from Russia is the simple and straightforward answer. The history of technology transfer from the Soviet Union to China showed 3 dominant approaches. Transfer of industrial technology by aiding in the construction of industrial projects, helping China to develop science and technology through scientific and technical cooperation, helping China to reform and construct technical colleges and taking in students to study in the Soviet Union. India was also a beneficiary of Soviet technology transfer and assistance programs. Soviet assistance focused on the development of industrial capacity through visiting specialists, the acceptance of Indian students, and scientific cooperation projects. The Soviet Union started its assistance to India with a steel plant and gradually expanded into other fields. The CCCP financially and militarily supported SWAPO and MPLA, South African freedom fighters. Based on the experience of both China and India, Nigeria should seek to join the BRICS as soon as possible. Whilst waiting for acceptance, it should request for technology transfer from the BRICS countries as well as seek to align with their developmental and governance structures. The idea would be to plug Nigerian engineers and entrepreneurs into the vast heavy industry manufacturing base available in Russia, just like the Americans have plugged Afrobeat into the world via their music industry. Used machines for construction, heavy engineering tools, tools fabrication, etc., should start being advertised/shipped for sale to industrial hubs in Nigeria. They should look to customize the existing tools for use in solving local engineering issues in places like Nui, ABA, Ladipo, etc. Going back in time, in the Soviet era, municipal water supply, sewage and wastewater treatment, solid waste disposal, and street cleaning and snow removal were funded largely by central budgets and run by centralized integrated teams. This priceless integrated knowledge and planning experience acquired from running such services is readily available in Russia. The approach will be to create partnership pair relationships between a city in Nigeria with a Russian city of similar size and similar development level, preferably in the Russian Far East, where the level of development might be ever so slightly closer to what would typically be obtainable in the Nigerian context. Such partnerships can also happen at the level of regions, but not higher, in order to reduce the bureaucratic burden that will be required to drive the relationship forward. Using experience gleaned from Chinese rail lines meant to run between China and Europe, Russia will hopefully help with modeling and providing equipment and training that will help integrated local road services providers to profit from the customs duties on cargo and the tolls collected for use of the tolled roads, in addition to spurring the economy of nearby regions by creating jobs and easing transport. As part of this development strategy, Special Economic Zones (SEZs) will be set up in existing established industrial zones across the country, such as was done on the Russky Island in Vladivostok. Also, Advanced Development Zones (ADZs) or Territorial Призающего развития will be set up in various locations within each of the regional economic zones that had previously been deindustrialized to mirror the work done in the RFE, Russian Far East. SEZs and ADZs will offer investors advantages such as exemptions from certain profit taxes or reduced social contribution rates. The regional governments will also provide business infrastructure in these areas. Russia will share policy information and implementation details on how the previously underdeveloped RFE was refocused, with the ongoing plans to rebuild 48 regional airports. Russia will also engage their track building, maintenance, and equipment manufacturing companies using funding guarantees so they can take up the repairs and rehabilitation of existing rail tracks in Nigeria for the express purpose of making them operational and suitable for commercial use, or can then profit from. Page 7. Power Summary. Communism is Soviet power plus the electrification of the whole country. Otherwise, the country will remain a small peasant country, and we must clearly realize that. Without a plan for electrification, we cannot undertake any real constructive work. These statements were first declared in 1920, over a century ago now, as the famous formula for industrialization and rapid development by the iconic and revolutionary communist leader Vladimir Lenin and his team when they presented their first 10-year plan to electrify the country via the construction of a network of regional thermal, hydropower power, and combined heat and power stations. Today, Russia's national grid is comprised of 73 individual regions that are divided into zones, each falling under the control of one of the top backbone electric grid branches of 7 MES zonal power systems: Northwest, Central, Middle Volga, North Caucasus, Urals, Siberian, and Far Eastern. The power generation capacity consists of about 440 thermal plants, mostly fired by natural gas. Only about 77 are coal plants. Thermal generators account for roughly 68% of total capacity. All aspects of the Nigerian power grid should be handed over to the regional economic zones for management. The existing players in the electricity industry, generation, distribution, transmission, bulk purchaser, settlement, etc., should all be split into units that work under the rules, regulations, and policy directives put forward by the administrative units running each region. The operators of the regional power system units within Russia will be directly paired with the authorities within the economic regions in Nigeria to help drive the operations of the private companies that are currently running the systems. The first area of cooperation should be the introduction of the technical players within the individual regional power industries to Russian equipment manufacturers and component manufacturers that can help to source or fabricate any faulty components that need to be repaired to get any existing equipment that is already deployed into operational use. To inject extra capacity into the existing power generation mix, a power barge can be rapidly delivered and moored in sheltered coastal areas, river estuaries, on existing docks or at a primitive sheet-piled wharf, independent of local resources, unsatisfactory infrastructure or poor soil conditions. Barges can also be floated into dredged-out areas and backfilled to form virtual land-based plants that can be removed at some point in the future. The Russians have experience in the use of power barge-based units from the likes of large power equipment companies like Powerships, Wärtsilä, Caterpillar, etc., producing power outputs from 9 megawatts, 800 megawatts. Furthermore, existing ships can be converted into FPPs, floating power plants, although converting a bulk carrier into a power station by placing several generators into the cargo hold is a major undertaking. In order to power gas and heavy fuel power generator units, the expertise for moving the relevant fuel around to the location of the power units will be required. Gazprom exports a significant amount of gas over large distances to several countries, and in recent years it has, through its subsidiary Gazexport, also begun exporting liquefied natural gas, LNG. The approach would be to set up regional joint ventures between the specialist companies within Gazprom that provide technical expertise to the individual economic regions. The initial objective would be to repair existing gas or heavy fuel pipelines, improve their pumping capacity, build pipelines required to connect the barges to nearby networks for gas/heavy fuel supply, bring online modular LNG processing units, and set up the transportation networks and equipment required for the timely delivery of fuel to existing power generation units that are currently not within the immediate vicinity of piped fuel networks. Russia-based subsidiaries of the likes of Siemens, GE, Alstom, ABB, Skoda Power, Schneider Electric, Westinghouse, and Mitsubishi Heavy Industries will provide transformer substations, line protection panels, and breakers control automation for 110 to 220 kV, etc. Page 8, Healthcare Summary. Prior to the revolution of 1917, a public Russian healthcare system was virtually non-existent to the vast majority of the population outside of a few urban centers. However, immediately after the revolution in 1918, the Soviet Union became the first country to promise universal, cradle-to-grave healthcare coverage. The right to health became a constitutional right of Soviet citizens. In the case of Nigeria, each economic region should implement a healthcare system that will be comprised of the following 4 top-level branches: public, parallel, private, and NGO. The existing public system will continue to be the biggest, operating at the regional level with municipal authorities managing large polyclinics, hospitals, and research centers. The parallel system, which is operated separately, is for top-level government personnel, senators, ministers, justices, generals, etc., and their families, as well as those covered by voluntary insurance. It is also available to the public on a paid access basis. Its express intention is to help stem the tide of health tourism by government officials. The private system will be primarily concentrated in urban areas. It will support a voluntary health insurance system, which is purchased mainly by employers and members of the public who can afford it and appreciate the access it provides to top-level facilities. The NGO system primarily focuses on the establishment of first aid stations and small polyclinic centers within the premises of religious facilities like churches, mosques, spiritual homes, etc. However, it will also play a role in general outpatient care in collaboration with the existing PHCs run by government and international institutions. The health industry is a business of sorts, even though it is naturally looked upon as a humanitarian service. To facilitate the rapid growth of the aforementioned parallel and private systems, policies would be implemented to make sure that they can operate as highly profitable, fully commercial business ventures. Key objectives would be to directly employ labor locally, the creation of jobs through foreign direct investment, make sure our talented youth get engaged in the business of the provision of healthcare services, building capacity, benefit from the transfer of knowledge and know-how, and do not end up moving abroad in the so-called brain drain. Looking across the spectrum, the various aspects of the health industry, like pharmaceuticals, healthcare delivery, and the healthcare services sector, like food and cleaning that are integral to the functioning of the system, to name but a few, are all environments that will be open to investors. The idea is that the Nigerian health industry could build a similar deep capacity in the health industry as Cuba has been able to do. The NGO system will typically use a standard-size shipping container kit out with standard medical, IT, and auxiliary power generation equipment to deliver PHC services as follows. Every PHC must have electronic medical records and use treatment guidelines. The manpower for PHC centers, which include CHUs, community health workers, nurses, midwives, NYSCDRs, and other medical officers, will be funded as a priority. An ongoing training schedule for building capacity in the field for medical technicians will be put in place to provide focused training for suitably qualified temporary staff drawn from the pool of students awaiting their results for access to the various tertiary institutions across the nation. The central idea is to train such individuals in particular focused areas, example, a dental technician for cleaning teeth, operation of medical devices like scanners, IT assistant using smartphones to help with collaboration during the diagnosis of medical conditions, or even training individuals to carry out certain medical procedures like say cataract, as was successfully done in Gambia to rapidly reduce a huge backlog of patients awaiting surgery. Page 9. Education summary. Engineering education in Russia started with the foundation of the School of Mathematical and Navigational Sciences in Moscow in accordance with Tsar Peter the Great's decree dated January 27, 1701. Russia, having more than 300 years of history of engineering education, has contributed significantly to engineering education internationally. After the 1917 revolution, higher engineering education in Russia developed at a very fast rate. In the 1920 to 1930s, the forerunners of PTUs included schools of factory and plant apprenticeship, which were partly inherited from the vocational school system of the Russian Empire. The Moscow Power Engineering Institute is specialized in the field of power engineering, electrical and thermal engineering, electronics and nanoelectronics, optical techniques, technological machines and equipment, computer science, economics, and management. The idea would be to pair them up with local vocational institutions in Russia to then work with economic regions in Nigeria to set up laboratories and workshops for training our youth in the practical use of their deep knowledge of the field of electrical power. A region is best placed to undertake the role of reorienting the system, to review the number and distribution of vocational schools. A region is also more knowledgeable about the local business environment and can quickly promote and invest in new programs, provided that these new programs meet the required education quality standards and are geared up to produce trained personnel who contribute to the local built environment. Each economic region in Nigeria will be tasked with designing regulations for various kinds of vocational schools, setting up state standards of vocational education, ensuring equivalence between regional and international diplomas of vocational education, developing standard curricula, textbooks, and teaching aids, establishing the procedure for teacher certification and stipulating regional requirements for engineering norms. This new regional model is required to provide a system of close cooperation between state institutions, private businesses, trade unions, and educational institutions. It will help to attract new investments into vocational education and help raise the quality and prestige of vocational training. Nigeria has a lot of certificated graduates. However, what is deeply lacking are the skills required to put their expensively acquired theoretical knowledge into practical use. Call it a changeover from a design-oriented education to education focused on practical experience that can be used to mold, space, and future-proof the local built environment. Regional Tradesmen Standardization Institute will be created in partnership with Russian Vocational Institute, proposing a modern, comprehensive, and holistic approach to developing and maintaining standardization of skill amongst artisans in the various regions, whilst also introducing a clear and effective process by which a citizen in need can engage skilled workers of any trade with reasonable trust and peace of mind. This engagement will be done using several types of technologies, including websites, mobile applications, and the use of the USSD telephone platform to service all strata of society easily and quickly. Conceptually, this tradesman revolution will be achieved by doing the following: setting up a national/regional database for conducting tests to certify and license skilled workers. Issuing a certificate of apprenticeship to skilled workers of any trade after the individual candidate has passed the relevant test. Enrollment of skilled workers into the institute based on payment of fee of say 5,500 naira. Skilled workers can take the exams whenever they are ready at their local test center. After the successful of the exam, the Tradesmen Standardization Institute will be contacted by the local testing agent for the issuance of the appropriate certificate. To keep the acquired knowledge and competence levels ever fresh, the certificates issued will expire after 3 years but can be renewed by paying the appropriate recertification fee. Page 10, Economy Summary. Communalism is a political philosophy and economic system that integrates communal ownership and confederations of highly localized independent communities. With perestroika in 1991, Gorbachev greatly overpromised what capitalist reforms could achieve, leading to dismal failure at increasing output and living standards. Coming in, Boris Yeltsin set a policy to burn down the planned communist economy, not to reform it, in spite of how strong the general discontent against this approach was. Yeltsin's reformers clearly achieved their set goal of letting the economy go up in flames. During the 1990s, thousands of small banks were set up for sending cash offshore. However, in the 1998 crisis, these oligarch-controlled banks all collapsed. Elvira Nabiullina took over in 2013 as governor of the Central Bank of Russia, CBR, and cut down the number of banks from 4,500 at its peak to just under 500 in November 2022. She is still in the role, keeping the ship steady. Going by the effectively bankrupt state of the nation in 2000 when Putin became president, nothing epitomizes the rise of the middle class under Putin like the virtual macroeconomic revolution, to the point where Russia is one of the largest creditors of US debt in the world, and the growth of the mortgage market. Homeownership has been a key policy goal of the Kremlin, and Putin has personally actively tried to drive down home loan interest rates. Under President Vladimir Putin, Russia has returned to Africa. Going by the attendance at the last Russia-Africa summit, few other global actors currently offer a partnership that is as comprehensive as Russia's. At a time when the West is very reluctant to share new technologies with African countries, Russian technology in fields like energy, resource extraction, transport, and digitalization is now in great demand in Africa. In fact, as an aside, the NNPC should probably be reconfigured to operate exactly like Gazprom. The leaders of each economic region should engage Russian government departments to seek out lessons learned on the subject of how they moved from their citizens scavenging in refuse bins under perestroika in 1991 to Russia becoming a food, energy, and military superpower today. The Russians use coordinating policy to make the concept of a megalopolis/supercity, a group of metropolitan areas which are perceived as a continuous urban area through common systems of transport, economy, resources, ecology, etc., an invaluable driver of growth around large cities like Moscow and Leningrad. The idea would be to use lessons they have to drive forward the improvement of living conditions in places like Lagos, Ibadan, Port Harcourt, Benin City, etc. Lastly, an approach for a potential mass housing project is outlined below. At the planning approval stage, every housing proposal by anyone must provide affordable housing in every 3 or 4 units. For example, if you are building 4 flats, one must be designated for registered affordable rent, based on consensus agreed upon between stakeholders like the government, the local community leaders, the estate developer, etc. This approach ultimately also helps stem the tide of gentrification. Failing conformance with the approach of proportional housing units above, or as an alternative method to it, a housing tax is applied. This would be used to provide affordable housing somewhere else. Avoidance of building only low-cost housing in any one place, it would only lead to a ghetto enclave taking hold. As multipolar becomes the new normal in sub-Saharan Africa, Russia's projection of influence is just one element of a potentially attractive and bigger systemic change. The economic regions within Nigeria will be encouraged to leverage the army of students that were trained in Eastern Europe to set new trends of technical cooperation with Russia, in which technology transfer is part, front, and center of any agreement. As market experts put it, everything is needed here: agricultural products and essential products, medicines, fuel, technology, auto parts, etc. Page 11. Corruption and Public Sector Summary. Legvo differentiates between 3 categories of states and their corruption profiles. First, there are criminal states. These are states where the core activity of the state is criminal, that is, where the state depends overwhelmingly on the returns from illicit trade to finance itself. The second is criminalized states. In these countries, the state's core activity may not be corrupt, but the process by which the state acts is. Finally, some states are characterized by public corruption, whereby some public agencies and officials are corrupt, but most core institutions remain uncontaminated. The Nigerian state currently operates under the first category. On this basis, the quickest way to take control of the corruption issue in Nigeria is to immediately devolve all administration to the economic zones. It is assumed that any perceptible corruption within the economic zones will at worst fall into the third category, as described above. A real fight against systemic corruption would include the following: the creation of a socially oriented state, the real separation of branches of government, independence of the judicial system, redistribution of the military to meet severely underfunded social needs, changes in legislation to get rid of black holes, loopholes, and policy ambiguities. To make it easier for the government to provide good public services, and for ordinary Russians to deal with bureaucracy, services were standardized and citizen access was simplified. One-stop shops were introduced where applicants file a single request for the paperwork they need, from birth certificates to pension forms, instead of applying to many different ministries. Reducing the number of interactions between clients and officials also lowers the chance of corruption. The individual economic regions will work with Russian civil servants and IT service providers to implement customized versions of the IT services offerings used to drive the successful provision of public services in Russia. One of the lessons of economic history is that the wrong economic policies can have devastating consequences. Grossman, 2013. The poor advice from economists, it raised serious issues about integrity within the economics profession, in terms of both the speed and nature of Russia's privatization process is an example of free market ideology trumping pragmatism. It is also an example of why transplanting economic ideas from other economies need to take proper account of the political and institutional setting in the host country. Putin brought the oligarchs to heel and reversed the erosion of Russia's wealth. His rise to power in 2000 brought the days of the oligarchs, asset stripping, and the erosion of Russia's wealth to an end. The oligarchs were expected to cooperate with the state's economic and political objectives or else face exile or worse. This made him popular with the people. To curb corruption and compromised advice from economic hitmen, the economic regions should sign individual special bilateral mutual extradition treaties with Russia, covering all IT systems that they should consciously endeavor to have cloud technology-based components domiciled in Russia. The pillars of Putin's administration were the Siloviki, veterans of the country's secret service, the KGB, and other law enforcement agencies. The Siloviki were placed on company boards to enforce Putin's policies and safeguard company assets. Putin's version of state capitalism ensured that in the absence of secure property rights, managers and owners would not engage in asset stripping at the expense of the country/shareholders. Funny enough, what Alphabeta started doing in 1999, the communists were doing better in 1959. Working closely with seasoned fraud and anti-corruption czars from within the Russian administration, leaders of the economic zones should set out to outfit processes and workflows that will quickly eliminate the loopholes and other deficiencies and inefficiencies within the system that are being used to carry out fraud. Just like in Nigeria, corruption in Russia centers around the following fields: customs services, tax authorities, law enforcement agencies, lower-level bureaucracy, educational institutions, big retail companies and airline manufacturers. Page 12, Agriculture Summary. Stalin wanted the Soviet Union to have more efficient farms. Agriculture needed to embrace modern technologies. Russia and the other Soviet states had historically produced less food than their country required. The use of new farming methods and the introduction of a new system were needed to turn the situation around. The concept of collectivization was introduced with the aim of transforming agriculture so that it produced a healthy surplus. Collectivization saw the creation of collective farms. These so-called kolkhozes would replace small holdings held by peasants with larger farms. The idea here is to have large fields in which crops can be sown, grown, and harvested using modern machinery. The new form of collectivization in the 21st century is worker cooperatives. In worker co-op enterprises, all workers are equal members of a democratically run production operation. They debate and decide what, how, and where to produce and how to utilize the net revenues. Agricultural worker co-op enterprises will exist alongside traditional enterprises. Each economic region will set up a strong agricultural bank for the distribution of agricultural credit and for the processing of tax exemptions, subsidies, and other state support instruments. This injection of finance should then trigger rural development and contribute to efficient agricultural output. Both agrarian lobbies shaping policy and the government need to move towards the creation of holistic policies for rural development, including the provision of human services such as health and education, as well as financial services, input supply services, and output marketing and distribution, which all have significant potential for growth. Their agrarian strategy needs to be heavy on help for large farms, debt write-off, subsidized access to farm equipment, a new credit system, and other measures that will be specifically intended for worker cooperative-owned farms. Each economic region will implement land reforms that allow land to move readily among users and improve the property rights of rural people so that land markets start to become competitive. If rural households are not confident that they can recoup the investment in land and farms through sale, if necessary, they will not invest their savings in farming. In private agriculture elsewhere, savings of rural households are a primary source of investment in agriculture. Russian wheat production and other crop productions witnessed significant growth. In the period 2015 to 2020, Russia exported 33 million metric tons of wheat on average according in the past 10 years. The government's decision to impose a food import ban on Western countries in the wake of the economic sanctions encouraged farmers to increase domestic production. The economic regions should understudy the counter-sanction measures Russia took in order to move the individual regions into the place of self-sufficiency in relation to certain food crops that do well in their individual regions. IMF loans come with conditions that require the use of genetically engineered crops and enable private corporations like Monsanto to plant its GMO seeds, corn, soy, etc., and spray the fields with Monsanto's Roundup, the world's most widely used herbicide, should be actively banned by the officials of each economic zone. Furthermore, the likes of billionaire Bill Gates, a major investor in Monsanto and proponent of genetic engineering, as well as experimental vaccines in the so-called Third World, and a man who sees the opportunities he envisioned and created regarding a future of massive food shortages in global grain production, should be actively prevented from having overbearing input into the formulation of the agricultural policy of individual regions. This level of caution is required because Bill Gates began buying up acre after acre of farmland in places like Costa Rica on which to grow GM crops. Food is and has always been political power. When unequally distributed and not universally accessible, food is a potent tool of domination and social control. To conclude, there are 4 key elements that agricultural reforms sought to address in post-communist states: market liberalization, farm restructuring, reform of upstream and downstream operations, and the creation of supporting market infrastructure. Page 13, Culture and Tourism Summary. Today, communist heritage tourism, dark tourism, is the newest sensation. This type of tourism occurs in Central and Eastern Europe, where tourists travel to places associated with former communist regimes. However, there is more to Russia than Moscow, St. Petersburg, and the Trans-Siberian Railroad. Tourists can experience the true culture by going further east of Moscow, closer to the Ural Mountains, where nature, history, and architectural treasures abound. The economic regions should set up tourist excursions to take advantage of the Kremlin decree dated October 30th that instructs Putin's cabinet to facilitate visa-free tourism, business, educational, sports, and cultural travel to countries, even if these countries require visas for Russians to visit. Nollywood producers and Afrobeat artists should be encouraged to travel to Russia to do filming there. Furthermore, the rich and mighty can also take winter vacations there, as Russia is a very large and diverse country. The traditional values rooted in Russia's cultural and historical experience have enabled the nation to effectively face new challenges and threats while keeping its identity intact. Among the values are human dignity, human rights, life, patriotism, moral ideals, the traditional family, historical memory, the continuity of generations, and the unity of all peoples who live in Russia. This Russia's worldview finds affinities in nearly all the geopolitical zones within Nigeria. The leaders within these zones should partner with Russians in order to continue to maintain their cultural and linguistic independence from Western countries. Putin reveals his thoughts on gender theory, saying that all major religions, including Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, and Judaism, had a profound impact on the development of Russia's values, which are shared by both the religious and non-religious. The Soviet Union projected itself as a champion of resistance to Western imperialism. Modern Russia is not driven by any particular ideology in its foreign policy, aligning itself flexibly with whichever players suit its interest. Soviet-era educational ties have created useful networks in Africa. As many as 200,000 Africans, including African leaders, trained at Soviet universities, polytechnics, and military academies from the 1960s. Currently, the People's Friendship University is in the process of reviving its ties to Africa and currently hosts 1,200 African students. The individual economic regions should trace any of their citizens who were students under the Soviet Union. The idea would be to leverage their language and technical skills to engage directly with small private companies in Russia for the purpose of them setting up joint ventures with local SMEs. Africa is an extremely interesting, promising potential Russian tourist destination, but a most poorly developed tourist region. Among the factors favoring the development of tourism on this continent, we can note the following: proximity to Europe and Asia, warm weather and a lot of suns all year round, the presence of beautiful beaches in many coastal areas of Africa, exotic nature, including the unique wild fauna, the diversity of cultural and historical attractions all across Africa. The factors which restrain the development of tourism in Africa are the low economic level of most African countries, poorly developed tourist infrastructure and transport network, unstable internal political situation in some countries of the continent, the lack of developed domestic tourism, to name but a few. The economic regions should take these issues to task, as there now exists an opportunity for tourist attractions available within their regions to become the new choice destination for Russians, due to the ongoing travel sanctions their fellow European countries have placed on them. To round up, it is worth emphasizing that the partnerships that Russia seeks in Africa should be about building more mutually beneficial conventional bilateral Africa-Russia relations that would focus on strengthening trade, investment, technology transfer, and educational exchanges. Amusing Russian etiquette: don't argue with Russian babushka or old grannies, don't show up empty-handed when invited to dinner, don't whistle indoors, whistling brings bad luck, don't leave empty bottles on the table, leaving an empty bottle on the table brings you bad luck.
This podcast was brought to you by BG Media. Download the BG Media app today or visit barglobal.net for more podcasts.